Restruct is a University of Arizona strategic initiative supporting an innovative approach to built environment research. It's truly transdisciplinary, reaching out to colleges across the university as well as to our civic leaders, some of whom have joined us today, and industry leaders who are also in this virtual room. Restruct is organized around 4 grand challenges for the built environment: redressing inequality and injustice and re-envision the built environment, creating resilient and effective urban and rural systems designed for optimal health, and to enable innovation through better decision-making and data analysis. Addressing these challenges become even more crucial in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so it's my pleasure to welcome you to the first of 2 symposiums, which will help us do this important work. The next symposium on post-pandemic adaptation will be held in April 2021. Please watch restruct.arizona.edu for more information. As you can imagine, adapting the built environment has been crucial for the university since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. We had to move quickly with only a few short months from when we closed campus in mid-March to August 24th, when we welcome students back. Our test, trace, and treat strategy is designed to minimize the spread of the COVID-19 virus while providing students an immersive learning experience, whether they're on campus or learning remotely. We've established a reentry task force, including an incident command system led by former U.S. Surgeon General Richard Carmona. These professionals work with our faculty to prepare the campus, and we have the tools in place to contain the spread of the virus. Public health and other faculty members have participated from the beginning, and their input has been incredibly valuable. A large part of our reentry plan has taken shape through a hierarchy of controls. For instance, our facilities management team has gone above and beyond, fabricating and installing over 1,300 sneeze guards and installing more than 1,400 touchless paper towel dispensers. They also have put up signage with reminders to wear face coverings and set up tents with portable coolers so classes could start outdoors despite the Tucson heat. I'll just say, I love the Tucson heat. Bill, there's no humidity and no bugs. As we've taken additional steps through administrative controls, such as establishing one-way traffic flows in buildings to minimize contact, we will need more of this kind of an adaptation in the months and years to come. And Restruct is an incredible source of insight and innovation to help guide us all. The purpose of this symposium is to ignite and connect ideas and people from academia, public service, and industry. These 4 hours have been purposefully shaped to introduce ideas and challenges related to COVID-19 in the built environment and dive more deeply into those challenges. You will then have the opportunity to connect with those who share your interests or who may have inspired you to think differently. Today's focus provides insights to travel, getting back into hotels, airplanes, and buildings for all kinds of activities. I believe the panelists will drive some important and thought-provoking conversations, obviously. So to start things off, it is my pleasure to introduce Steve Winston, who will introduce our panelists. Steve has over 48 years of experience in various aspects of research, engineering, construction, and serving in a variety of senior management roles for major corporations. His specific expertise includes nuclear sciences, nuclear medicine, environmental stewardship, large-scale complex construction, advanced energy systems, and process engineering. For a man who simply needs no introduction, Dr. Steve Winston.
Thank you, Bobby. I appreciate it. I've got a lot to live up to now. I ain't no cardiac surgeon.
Sorry, I was my script went away from me, so I blundered early on. But you know, take it away and have fun today.
Hey, thank you, Bobby. I think we will have an awful lot of fun. I'm looking forward to chatting with all of you. I know most of you at some level. That's one of the things we always do in transcending incrementalism, is try and figure out how we find the incremental pieces that science is so notorious for, and piece them together. I'm reminded of a guy named Otto many years ago came up with the idea of taking a piston from pumping out mines and connecting them to a clock, and then an ignition source that his friend Marconi came up with. And son of a gun, they ended up with an internal combustion engine as a result. Any one of those pieces by themselves wouldn't have worked. So that's how incrementalism can be nailed together to transcend itself. That's what we're all about here, is figuring out how we put together the pieces to respond in an open source and ad hoc way to reopen the world. And among the things we'll talk about are, what are we going to do to make the hotels safe, but not only make the hotels safe, but make people feel confident that they can go back to the hotels without worrying about it. So my friend Saad Aude and the Aude group is on board. He's coming to us from Dubai. We've got Brian Fleck coming to us from Canada. And Brian, I tell a lot of bad jokes about Canada, so you'll have to put up with that if you don't mind. Chuck Gerba is going to talk to us about flushing toilets. And Alethea Ida is going to talk to us about the amazing work that she's been doing. And then my new friend Milana Trounce is going to talk to us about biosecurity and how all these things fit together in the context of an open source sharing. Brian's work has been largely associated with the flow of air and how we optimize things associated with that. Chuck's been following our microbes around our bathrooms and beyond. And I'm going to ask you a lot of stuff about how do we create the appropriate sensors to deal with some of these things. Alethea has some great ideas about really novel materials that even go way beyond COVID-19. So I'd love to talk about that. And then Milana has been working in the emergency room, but also biosecurity is a very important part of it. And one of the cool things that she's been doing with respect to biosecurity is looking at ways that we can take ordinary things and ordinary structures, particularly in the built environment, to actually make the air cleaner and more virus-free. So she'll be talking about that. I'm going to, so we can get started early here and move quickly and allow more time for discussions, I'm going to introduce Alethea. And if you would like, go ahead, Alethea, and give a little bit of background and then go ahead and launch into your presentation.
Sure, thank you so much for the introduction, Steve. I'm an associate professor in the School of Architecture at the University of Arizona. My background is as an architect. I also have a doctorate in architectural sciences with an emphasis on architecture and ecology and material science research and physics. So with the, hold on, let me open up my presentation here. With the introduction this morning, as a part of this panel, I'm going to be speaking more specifically to a kind of overarching framework for hotel reentry. And the research framework addresses some layers of complexities that we might have to consider, and bringing together different specialists from different fields and disciplines to kind of look at things in synergy and reciprocal impacts across both the physical and the human environments and activities. So as we know, the hospitality industry is experiencing an extremely drastic impact because of COVID-19 pandemic and limitations and inhibitions for travel. And one of the responses, at least within the US from FEMA, has been to provide funding at state levels to incentivize opening up hotel rooms for homeless populations. That's also occurred here in Tucson, we have some of that type of program occurring right now. So it's an interesting, proposition as we start to really look at the future of the built environment, the amount of building stock that we have, and the different needs of society at different levels. And it adds another layer of complexity. Is there a possibility for the kind of outreach as well as reopening just for regular activity and operations? Within our research framework, there's a larger team that I'll introduce at the end of the slides, but within the research framework, we're kind of considering two major components of the hotel reentry. One is related to the physical environment, and the other is related to the human activities. And within that larger framework, we see three major aspects. One for the physical environment being the pathogen transport, really understanding the physics fundamentals of the pathogen transport within spaces related to the thermodynamics or material affinities, the droplet size versus the sort of aerosolization. The second being hygiene and human health. And that's sort of at the intersection between how the pathogen behaves on a physics level and how humans behave on a sort of psychology and activity level. So across these three areas, we have a number of kind of smaller, we might say focused research efforts that we envision. And all together, when we put that all together, there's we envision that the different data and the different findings from each sort of individual research area, whether that's related to phenomena, airflow, filtration, environment, under pathogen transport, or whether that's the materials, mechanical systems, hygiene, and human health under the sort of hygiene, human health area, or whether it's the perceptions, the notions about social distancing and behaviors and interactions of human psychology and behavior. Across these three, we envision that the findings and results will lend to a very robust sort of ability to look at correlational data and begin to really identify new, emerging theories for how we might transform our hotels and hospitality conditions, but also lending that that information can lend very well to just a broader built environment and building use conditions for the future as we kind of consider the post-pandemic potentials. So within the physical environment, we are looking at four major areas. What is happening with the phenomena of the SARS-CoV-2 in terms of its transport? Does it follow regular airflow patterns? What are some different filtration methods, whether that's different material filtration, material filters or mechanical filters? And how does this inform different modes of environment, right? So different spatial conditions, indoor and outdoor. And then for the hygiene and human health, we're looking at the intersection between these different material and mechanical systems for filtration, photocatalysis, and breakdown in relation to the practices of hospitality, cleaning, and those regimes. And, we have some different aspects about integrating apps and looking at kind of smart tools to identify some control mechanisms and also levels of risk and tie that back into potential risks within human health and hygiene. For the psychology and behavior, we're actually planning towards some type of hybrid symposium in hopefully in the spring of 2021 that our research group can utilize as a modality for understanding the human behaviors in terms of perceptions, actual practices of social distancing. How does that actually transform our use of spaces? can hotels still meet the capacity that they have historically? It will fundamentally, change their sort of pro forma in terms of the business economics of operations. And what are the sort of interaction levels, between individual rooms and people in hallways and circulation zones versus the use of traditionally larger conference spaces and banquet spaces and event spaces. So our team, our research team is, working through right now literature reviews, considering all these different variables from different lenses. And if we are able to go forwards with some form of hybrid symposium, we're looking at working directly with some type of hospitality team on the physical environment aspects. So there would be a client or partnerships that we're working on forming, and working also with some design, engineering, construction folks from the profession if we need to do any adaptations with that environment and kind of test that out. And then a symposium team that would create the sort of events and the activities around a Restruct concept also in that case. And we're really in the pre-event stage right now on the left. And then we have different modes of activities and research that would occur during the event. That would be a major time for data collection and really gathering the information in a sense in a really large living lab, the hotels themselves serving as that purpose. And then post-event, the data analysis, documentation, and research outcomes that could occur. Our physical environment team is comprised of myself, Althoff engineer from School of Architecture, who focuses on well-being aspects in the built environment, Wynn Burleson, who focuses on human and computer interactions, more from the social sciences, but also the physics background and electrical engineering's backgrounds. Youngjun Sun is the director of our SIE program. So he will be working with us on, simulations, different modeling of human flows in relationship to the space conditions. Dr. Perry Lee from mechanical engineering, and also Ewan McLeod on optical sciences and sensors. He's been working on developing, a sensing technology for the SARS-CoV-2 pathogen particle size. And from the human health team, Dr. Esther Sternberg, who is the research director of the Center for Integrative Medicine and also the founding director of the Institute for Place Wellbeing and Performance in collaboration with CAPLA. And Dr. Kelly Reynolds, she does amazing work across the environmental hygiene, health, and policy aspects, and doing a lot of the sort of in-place measures of, collecting samples and doing tracers and looking at the sort of risk levels in the physical environment. Karen Lutrick, who her emphasis is more on the community health sciences, and she has a lot of experience with, during this pandemic, with what's actually happening, at the human health level and the practices for testing and treating. And then Dr. Matthias Mell on the human psychology and behaviors aspects. So it's a broad team, and we're really looking forward to moving this work ahead and working and also linking in other folks as well that we haven't yet identified for some robust results. Thank you.
Even Fleming on this.
Thank you. I'd like to get into the details about some of the things that you're doing. And one of the things that intrigues me a lot is the work that you've done in materials science and adaptive materials. And it occurs to me that there may be ways in which we can use paints or adaptive surfaces to actually capture and function like a filter, where it attracts and using super hydrophilic materials to attract it to the wall and then stick it to the wall. So I guess it's throw something at the wall and see what sticks.
Right.
I'd like to explore that in our breakout section. I'd like to introduce now Chuck Gerba. Chuck has done an awful lot of work in facilitating our understanding of what's going on. He was earlier describing toilets in space, which that conjures up an awful lot of very interesting images. So Chuck, if you'd like to launch in, and we'll dig into how we marry a reactive surface to a toilet. Go ahead, Chuck. You're on mute.
Okay.
There you go.
Unmute myself and share the screen. And okay. Hopefully that worked.
It did.
Oh, can you see it?
We can. You're up and running.
Okay, here we go. All right. Let me go ahead and get started here. Just as a background, I'm an environmental virologist, and my career started in the toilet. I don't think I ever got out, but what I do is study how diseases spread in the environment from one person to another. That's air, water, food, indoor environments is what we look at and try to document what we get exposed to. Our role is largely detection of pathogens in the environment, viruses, where they occur, air, water, food, fate. We model their transport, survival, movement in indoor, outdoor environments, water, and then modeling the probability of infection along with Dr. Kelly's Reynolds group has been mentioned is just because you find an organism on a tabletop, what does it mean in the probability of anybody getting infected? Assessment of innovative interventions with disinfectants, largely emphasizing or modification of surfaces. Try to assess them both in the laboratory and in real world situations, then assessing interventions, like I said, in real world situations. One of the things we've noticed, we've done a lot of work in indoor environments over the last decade. And one of the things that's becoming obvious, more people work in offices than ever before. 80% of us work in an office. It makes a big difference on how viruses move. We've watched that if a person walks in an office building with a virus on his hand, it will contaminate eventually 50% of the surfaces in that building and half the people's hands in that building. I always believe the hand is quicker than the sneeze and spread a disease from what we've seen in indoor environments. We travel more than ever before. We go longer distances than ever before. We spend less time cleaning than any generation. And we spend more time in public places, in larger public places than ever before. We touch more common surfaces that more people have touched and shared than any generation in history. So you wonder why we're having a pandemic. I can tell you by just looking at how viruses move in indoor environments. I just wanted to start out restrooms here. If you want to know the germiest restrooms, it's the airplane toilets. Reason why, if you've ever been at O'Hare Airport in Chicago, the toilet seats never get cold. They're always warm because somebody's waiting in line to sit on them all the time. Actually, the worst airports, the worst toilets in public transportation are commuter trains, by the way. We've studied that. Fast food, public hospitals, overall, you're looking at fecal bacteria and where they occur. And the largest percentage is airports because of heavily used, thing to confirm. What about airplanes? Airplane toilets are among the worst. Think about that. There's 30 people per toilet, unless you're flying Southwest, and it's more like 60, okay? So you don't want to wait in line for a toilet. Think about the airline. And they're heavily contaminated. The average top surface countertop has about 100 to 1,000 organisms, but a push button has 95,000 in an airplane toilet. Trays are one of the more contaminated in airplanes. Why? That's where your hands are. Seatbelt, why? That's where your hands are. It's where your hands are the areas that tend to get most heavily contaminated and where you're going to get the greatest exposure. So tabletops, office tops, coffee tops are the worst. Disease outbreaks associated with airplane travels have been noted before, particularly aerosol ones, tuberculosis, influenza, measles, but it's usually the people right next to you because of the way airflow is in an airplane. It's not back and forth, it's around the plane, so it's usually people on either side. of you, and this has been documented in aircraft. Norovirus causes diarrhea. That has to get into your mouth and not inhaled. And usually it's the people that are in the aisle seats that get exposed, because these people who are sick on an airplane are running to the toilet. So if you're constipated, I recommend the aisle seats on large long-term flights. I've done, for the news media, I was actually involved in sampling airplanes a couple of times. I took floor fights. I found MRSA, which causes a skin infection, methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, on all 4 trays that I actually tested. Is a pretty persistent organism. I isolated norovirus from one, and I managed to get also influenza and parainfluenza, which causes the common cold. So you do get exposed on airplanes to a wide variety of microorganisms, quite surprisingly. So what do I think is needed? We need assessment of innovative antiviral technologies, not only in the lab, because a lot of what you see is being promoted are studies that have been done in the laboratory, largely certification by regulatory agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency. And we need real world scenarios. We've learned all the time, viruses don't behave as people often predict unless you do a tracer experiment. We need continuously active antiviral coating to reduce transfers, or like you suggested, Steve, sticky things. If it can't get off on the sticky thing onto your finger, you can't become ill. Or if it can't be re-aerosolization is one of the things we noticed. The worst thing to do is sit on a couch or during an epidemic, because you aerosolize anything that's been in there again. So there's a lot of things that need to be reconsidered. Fewer models on transported droplets in indoor environments. We need real world testing with viruses. I've been involved with modeling for water and other types of media before. And microorganisms don't behave according to models. Why? Because every microorganism is different. You got 1 billion viruses, that's like 1 billion human beings, and they're all going to behave different. And what you learn, you really need empirically based models to really be sure that you're modeling the behavior of living organisms. Microorganisms show a lot of variability. Even though we say SARS-CoV-2, every time somebody sneezes, he releases hundreds of thousands of different ones that can behave differently. And I think all this has to be put together in application of quantitative microbial risk assessment to assess new technologies, interventions, because using that, we can say things like reduces your risk of getting infected by 90%, 50%, whatever. And then it'll give us an idea what combinations of technologies can do to reduce the risk. I really want to give these technologies the numbers and showing that different approaches can reduce the probability of getting infected with an organism, just not exposure. And I think that's it.
Chuck, one of the things I'd like to talk with you about is you mentioned poliomyelitis and the spread of poliomyelitis by toilets, but also there's a hormesis effect that needs to be taken into consideration. In the 1950s, there was an outbreak of poliomyelitis that became all of the news and the iron lung and everything else that you probably remember. Maybe you and I are the only ones who remember it, but
no, I actually caught polio, so I remember well.
Oh my goodness. Well, there's a hormesis effect that actually had been protective up until the 1950s. And I'm curious about the degree to which there is a trade-off between the hormesis effect and viral exposure at some level overwhelms the hormesis effect.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point to consider too. What does it do? What does low-level exposure really do to you?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I think that there are some myths about herd immunity that I'm very worried that we're going to kid ourselves into believing that herd immunity is just around the corner. It varies, but when we get to the discussion, I'd be very interested in your thoughts about what is realistic and expectations of herd immunity as well.
Just depends what part of the herd you are in.
Yeah, I saw a bunch of cows the other day. Oh yeah, yeah, I heard of them. I'd like to now introduce Brian Fleck. Brian is from the University of Alberta, and he's been doing a lot of work in computational fluid dynamics for a variety of other purposes. And I encountered him just recently in his modeling of what's going on really. There's an awful lot of supposition about what are the air effects inside buildings, and there's an awful lot of variation, as we discussed yesterday, between mixed air environments and stratified air environments, and the degree to which that is an effective consideration. So, Brian?
Thanks very much. I'm just going to do my screen share here. I think that might be working.
You're up and running.
Okay, so I actually decided to make a really short presentation because I wanted to really hit on some key points that are quite important to me. I'm currently working with a group that's doing a very systematic and comprehensive literature review trying to relate heating, ventilation, and air conditioning to the current pandemic. And one of the things I'm discovering about the literature in this area is that the different fields of scientific endeavor have a very different idea on what's important and how you present information. So talking about that here today. Where I want to go with this in this short presentation is to talk about how important it is for us as scientists to get this information to the public. Now, this is a very common problem that a lot of us encounter, and we're seeing it all the time because of what's going on in the information age. There is an abundance of information, and information doesn't necessarily correlate to truth or fact. So the real challenge for us as scientists is to overcome what's well known as the signal to noise problem. There's a limit to how much information you can transmit to the target if your signal is mixed in with a great deal of noise. And I'm trying to get this idea out in the public too, so that the public can be more discerning about the information that they rely upon. We certainly see that this is, you can look at this at any length scale, where it could be global politics all the way down to community, how people in the public process the information that we send out. And I don't know what you guys call this down in the US, but when we were kids, we called this game broken telephone. And that's when children sit in a circle and each whispers something to one another, or not to one another in a line. This is very similar to in communications in cellular phones and other data processing and information theory. Each step along the way, as you pass information down the chain, you have a risk of losing information. So I'm going to go over 4 of these things, and this is something that I speak of in context of us trying to get our literature review on COVID-19 and HVAC out into the public. We start by gathering the information, and currently what we usually do, and what a lot of people do when they do literature review, is they go to the people they know through reputation. This is quite good, and this is quite useful. ASHRAE, which is the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, Air Conditioning Engineers, has gone to this approach and gone to their most reputable scientists and quickly got out the most reliable information. However, if we want a comprehensive understanding of what's going on, we have to look at a systematic approach to gathering all the information. This helps us overcome sort of the group effect, or the bias where we tend to go with the people who we're already familiar with. Minority reports and other information that's outside of our sphere of knowledge is really important for getting the full story on what's going on. The next thing we go through, and we gather up this information, we start trying to transmit it to the public. We scientists have to find ways of taking this information and simplifying it so the public can understand it. This requires a translation of sorts. And this is not always easy because some information is inherently difficult to understand. And so when we translate this information, we have to make sure that we don't oversimplify things, or we don't cut off the important message. Sometimes we have to leave things complicated. But where we really run into problems, I find, is that the listener has a tendency to take the information and overlap it onto their current understanding of the world so that they can make some generalizations. And this is one of the more dangerous steps, because what we see are people who've already got an idea bouncing around inside their head about what should be done about COVID or heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, or indoor air quality. And they just use what they see to confirm what they've already decided needs to be done. And we need to watch out for this, because what we're seeing quite a bit in the public sphere is reactions to scientists giving suggestions to policymakers is the rapid adoption of something that you heard these same people saying they wanted to do previous to you giving them advice or information. So in other words, they're ignoring what you say, but they're just using it as a crutch to support the decision they had already made previously. And this leads to some surprisingly authoritarian approaches to things, or approaches that really are they have an agenda. Finally, when the policymaker acts, and these are the people who are actually going to affect large numbers of people, we see them adopting methods of persuasion that are not particularly persuasive, and some of them are quite good at persuasion. Usually this is the specialty of politicians, but we're seeing the use of trying to use guilt, trying to use authoritarianism, and that doesn't tend to be as persuasive. And so we see people rapidly pulling away from the directives from their public policymakers and going off and doing their own thing because they don't believe in the information they're getting. And so you see people ignoring directives from the policymakers, and people not wearing masks, people not using social distancing, because the persuasion is ineffective. So that's sort of a message that we found about, how are we going to get all this literature out to the public if we've got all these things in the way? And because there's a great deal of information that could be useful to all these people. Right now, okay, my slide, there we go. So here, where are we right now with our literature review on heating, ventilation, and air conditioning and its effect on transmission of COVID-19? Quite a few of us were fairly convinced early on. This may have been bias, of course, on my behalf, but we were fairly convinced there was going to be an aerosol component of this quite a while ago. And it certainly seems to be heading in that direction. And oddly enough, there seems to be resistance to admitting that this is one of the modalities of transmission. And I'm not sure if this is people who are worried about admitting they may have been wrong earlier, or having a difficult time modifying their understanding of this situation. The disease clearly appears to be moving in a number of different modes, and aerosol seems to be quite one of the important things. When it comes to the literature on how you get aerosols out of airstreams in buildings, really filters and UV are the technologies that are known to work. There's a lot of flashy new technology that people are working on, and that's fine. But if we're going to introduce new technology, we need to run it through the same level of vigilance with the systematic study and evaluation of these technologies before we just adopt them. But really, one of the messages that we're finding, and quite important, is very simple safety and risk management procedures are actually one of the best things you can do. That means just being vigilant and having a management process that relies on things like cross-checks, checklists, people signing, initialing things when people do cleaning, when people do filter inspection, when people update systems. We need traceability on who does what if we want to get to the culture of safety that we need for indoor air quality that we have in a lot of other areas of endeavor for workplace safety. I'd like to say at the end, though, that no matter what we do on indoor air quality, if we improve indoor air quality for COVID-19, we are also going to benefit in many other ways. And there was, 30 years ago in ASHRAE, they were talking about how a new generation of indoor air quality is coming. And, for 30 years, we haven't seen much. Maybe this is now the time where we're going to see a change. And really what is needed is a market sensitized to the importance of indoor air quality. And that's really the change that may be coming. This is maybe my moralistic final statement on this, but what it comes down to is honesty and transparency. And we really have a problem in our society, both in politics and science, that we have a great deal of information, but a lot of it is not really based on evidence or rational decision making. We've got too many decision policymakers who have different agendas, and for us as scientists, we have to keep going back to the rational and calm approach to getting information out, and those sorts of reliable, repeatable sources of information are coming from us. We have to not get pulled into advocacy and trying to push for ideas that are really driven by our biases. And I know that's a very general statement to make at the end here, but I hope that resonates, because it covers so many of the fields that people will be speaking on today. So that's where I'm going to end, and I hope that was helpful. Pass the baton on.
Thank you, Brian. Well, it's very interesting because yesterday we had a presentation by Professor Massaro from the Emeritus Dean of the Law School at the University of Arizona. And one of the things that she was pointing out is that there are several things that we have to take into consideration with respect to rights and the Constitution here in the United States. I'm sure the same thing applies in Canada because you're a constitutional monarchy. Oh, no, I know you're not a monarchy anymore.
Well, our Constitution's only a couple decades old, or 4 decades old, but
Yeah, nonetheless, the point is that the public health protections are not inconsistent with the Constitution. But one of the points that she was making is that the discourse has to be rational, and it has to be supportable. And I think your point about signal to noise is really, really important. I think from a scientific perspective or an engineering perspective, at least that's the way I look at it, is that the most effective way for us to counteract misinformation is to look at it as a form of noise. And there's intentional misinformation where people try and, quote, flood the zone with just pure nonsense, and to use the most controversial statement possible to flood the zone with a discourse that is completely off the mark. And I think that's a serious mistake. Now, in order for us to, I think, move forward with stuff that actually links things together, Chuck, when you talk about what happens when the toilet flushes, it creates an aerosol. And those aerosols, as you probably have, everybody has probably seen with the Brownian movement, those begin circulating, many of them circulating upwards and into the breathing zone, and then on up into the higher parts of the environment, depending upon the type of air exchange equipment that we have. For instance, there are the stratified, which starts from the below, and then there's the mixed air that starts from above. Both of those have implications with respect to how we harvest or move the stuff out of the breathing zone. But breathing isn't the only thing, as Chuck was pointing out. Communication can also be as a result of settling in your hair, settling on your skin, settling on your clothes, actually creates an opportunity to either kill or trap the virus or spread it. And those things have to be taken into consideration as well. So Alethea, I think it's important for us to be thinking about fabrics as well as the built environment. We might want to expand that to the worn environment. And Carol Stewart, I see you're on. I want to introduce you to some folks that are on our regular Thursday meeting. You've probably seen her. Carrie Lehman is working on the possibility of virucidal cosmetics and virucidal hair treatments and stuff like that. So those are things that we need to think about. And in Chuck and Brian, I'd very much like to look at possibilities of deposition as a function of airflow. And the different types of deposition that are forced, for instance, with a mixed air system and the downflow. I've walked through Home Depot and nearly frozen to death when I walked underneath one of their fans. And I'm just wondering how many bugs are they drafting into my head there. So I'd like to now move on to our next presentation for today. Milana Bookman-Trounce will be talking about some of the things that I just raised, and that is how do we actually look at the practical things that we can do to make our living spaces much more virus-free. So Milana.
All right. Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you for having me today. Let me try to share my screen here. All right. One second. So yeah, so by way of introduction, so I have been looking into this, I have been compelled by this topic for the last 15 years. When I came upon this fairly serendipitously as a result of some work for the US State Department, actually, and realized that our world is not prepared to deal with large scale but infectious disease threats, including pandemics, but not to mention agents of terrorism. So I've been, so this is the reason why I started a class on this topic and a biosecurity center at Stanford, because I realized this is definitely not just a medical problem. It is obvious now, but it's very much a problem which involving engineers and the government and policy and business and just really all hands on deck. So I've written on this a bunch, but I know I don't have a whole lot of time. So I just want to focus on this talk on engineering controls, because I think what I like about engineering controls is that it's engineering controls are by definition, they're independent of human behavior. And one of the reasons why this pandemic has been so disruptive to our society is because we had to change the way we live with the lockdowns and restrictions and large gatherings. So this is a framework I wanted to propose a little bit of echoing of what Althea said earlier, but this is just a different framework of looking at this. And this is an old concept but utilized by OSHA, Occupational Health and Safety Administration, which basically looks at ways of eliminating hazards from the workplace. So it's focusing on the workplace, but really this is as true in churches or schools or even homes as it is in the workplace. This can be utilized anywhere. And COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, or any other viruses or bacteria for that matter, can be viewed as a workplace or other type of hazard. And you want to look at the basically hierarchy of controls, and the top is most effective to least effective. Most effective, of course, is eliminating the hazard altogether. And this is what lockdowns are about, as well as working remotely, for example, or even testing prior you coming to work. Then down the list we go, and that's we're talking about adjusting the workplace, and we're talking about engineering controls, and this is really Restruct Symposium. This strikes me kind of this is what it's all about. So you're pretty high up the food chain there, and then down the hierarchy are administrative controls, which is all about adjustment of work processes and adjustment of how people behave. And this is where we talk about staggering of shifts, decreasing occupancy in buildings, implementing hygiene practices. And really down at the bottom is personal protective equipment. And it's considered to be least effective because, least useful because you put all the onus on the individual and all the burden on the individual to protect themselves. And of course, I'm a healthcare worker, so I love PPE, don't get me wrong. I think you can do a lot with that. But really, if we're looking at this threat systematically, I think this is a very useful framework. So jumping into this, into more specifics, I just wanted to outline several broad categories of engineering controls for the purposes of stimulating the discussion here without going in a whole lot of detail. And I think where we should be going and where the research should be heading. So obviously, we know about physical controls and physical barriers. We've seen them in supermarkets and such. I think they can be used creatively in many different ways. And then there are several other categories, such as like Brian talked about and some speakers yesterday talked about, optimization of ventilation, filtration, airflow, massively important. Completely agree there with Brian. It's so amazing how there's been so many indications that it is transmitted by air, and yet it puzzles me that it's been ignored and kind of put under the rug, even by places, by institutions like WHO and the CDC. It still blows my mind to this day, but there we are. Anyway, as engineers and as scientists, I think this is our area of real opportunity. Optimizing temperature and humidity control, we can use the fact that viruses are less and bacteria are less likely to survive in higher and more humid environments in general. This is particularly true for SARS-CoV-2. Antimicrobial surfaces and UV light. So let me go through each of these in a little bit more detail. So you can look at it, you can dissect it many different ways. And it's so great, Brian, that your group is looking at very systematically literature review to see exactly what works, what makes sense. This is perfect. But one of the ways you can dissect it out is by cost, because something that could be used by a farmer in Bangladesh may be very different than what can be used by Google in their built environment. So optimizing natural airflow, even something simple as opening windows and doors and using fans may be very low cost but powerful. Then we're going to deploying MERV 13s and other types of better air filters. This MERV 13 just as an example, as well as portable air purifiers. You can look at UV light, and ultraviolet germicidal radiation has been used historically quite a bit. And then you can look at higher capital expenditures, like modifying HVAC systems and optimizing them and installing UV lights there and such. Optimizing temperature and humidity, actually, people have used used in very creative ways. There was a call from police that we need to be able to disinfect our vehicles somehow during this pandemic. So what Ford company came up with is that they came up with a software which utilizes all the existing hardware in their vehicles, but basically you can heat up the vehicles to 133 degrees Fahrenheit for over 15 minutes. And that essentially kills 99% of COVID. Simple hack, brilliant, it works. We know there is a synergistic effect between temperature and humidity. And basically, as temperature increases, that tends to deactivate or kill the virus. And as humidity increases, that also kills the virus. And as both of them increase, that tends to kill a virus even more in a synergistic effect. So that could be used, but you have to be careful. And that's why I say all of these things have to be used integratively, because actually, for example, UV upper room UV radiation actually works less effectively with higher humidity. So all of these things need to be looked at together. I love UV. I think there's a massive amount of promise in UV. It can be used in many ways. Basically, the nice thing about it is that it kills virus on the surfaces, but also kills virus in the air. And there's a lot of opportunity for innovation there, and people have innovated around that. And there are numerous companies in this space, including, for example, UV robots to sterilize airplanes. And what I particularly love is upper room UVGI, ultraviolet germicidal irradiation. It's an old technology. It's been used even in the 30s to help sterilize the air, to help disinfect, I should say, the air in the wards of patients with tuberculosis. And it's been used widely and also decrease transmission of things like smallpox and measles. And the beautiful thing about it, it can be, again, highly effective. It is more effective in lower humidity generally. And things are simple as using fans to really mix the air, actually, can increase the effectiveness of this intervention manyfold. So again, this is why it's important to look at all of these techniques in combination. Antimicrobial surfaces, basically, there are numerous ways of how you could use that. Some are biocide releasing, some are contact killing, some are using mobilizing cations. Lots of research in the various aspects in this area. For example, we know that SARS-CoV-2 doesn't live longer than 4 hours on copper surfaces, but it can live up to a week on plastics and stainless steel. There's some interesting research that came out actually from Australia, where they nano-etched aluminum surfaces and to make them basically rough to the point that it actually disrupts the membranes of both a bacteria and even the viruses on contact. And of course, Steve, like you mentioned, also antimicrobial paint and sprays, there's a lot of research in that area, and some companies that have sprung up as well. So bottom line, I think all of these things have to be used on as a combination for optimum benefit. The picture in the middle is actually a picture for those of you who love fancy French food. I do. There's a picture from a restaurant of Alain Ducasse in Paris. And actually early in this pandemic, he got some engineers to figure out how to make his restaurant safe. And you see on the top there, he put in the vents above each of the dining table, which essentially suck the air from literally above each dining table, in addition to to this, beautiful looking physical barrier. And it got certified by the French government as a safe place to eat out, even in the middle of the pandemic. So I think we should be doing more of that. Things are functional and beautiful, and things that work. And I love engineering controls, again, for the reasons I mentioned in the beginning, because they're independent of, they're less disruptive to society, basically. They're independent of, they don't require change in behavior by the people and by the users. So I think this is the future. So we do hackathons on this. I'm very interested in learning more about the various types of engineering controls. So if this is a topic of interest to you, please, I would love for you to reach out and talk. Maybe we could do something even at Stanford or outside of Stanford. Again, I'm trying to get Stanford folks interested in this as well, and do more looking into this, because I think this is a highly promising direction. Thank you very much, Steve, for having me.
Well,
And Barbara.
thank you for joining us, and I really appreciate your participation. There's several things that I think you're probably all starting to see in common here, and that's one of the purposes of transcending incrementalism, is to try and figure out how we connect the dots. And connecting the dots, I think, goes to Brian and Chuck and Alethea to bring all these things together so that we can take and do the engineering controls in a wide variety of areas. One of the things I think it's important for us to look at is how do we combine different things to maximize effect. I think we're at a tipping point. I don't think that the return to normal will be the old normal. I think we will have a new normal, and hopefully it's one, as Brian suggested, where we may adopt better principles. The old approach, and I think, Brian, you may have been working on this, up until COVID-19, everybody was looking at ways that they could turn down the number of air exchanges to reduce the amount of fan horsepower that's necessary, and to go to lower and lower filtration rates and all kinds of things that actually, I think, increase the likelihood of making germ-infested indoor air. My colleague and friend, Saad Aude, owns several hotels, and Saad has been looking at some of the stuff that you guys are talking about and to a point that you made, Brian, is how do we make sure that there are ways to communicate to the public that the places they go are safe. And one of them is to have a rigorous and meaningful protocol for checking to make sure that the rooms have been properly sanitized. But even beyond that, you need to go beyond physical checks, because people can check boxes. Checking boxes doesn't necessarily mean that the work has been done. And there are remote and passive devices that we can use that can tell us the presence of bacteria and viruses, and the presence of those pathogens and the degree to which they are present, or the concentration in which they're present, is important for people to know. And another thing that people are looking at is look-ahead devices, like if look on your cell phone and decide whether or not you're going to take the A train. But that would require us to have some information about how infested is the A train. And I'm thinking, Chuck, how infested is the toilet on the A train? I guess it sounds like it could be pretty bad. So we're going to take a break right now for a half an hour. We will return and have a general discussion among all of us at that time. So between now and 10 a.m. Pacific time, 1 p.m. Eastern time for those of you on the East Coast, and those of you who are with me here in the Mountain Time Zone, we will return at 11. So see you all in a little bit. Okay, well that probably is a good idea. One of the things I do in Transcending Incrementalism is generally to invite everybody in the group to participate. And since we're a little smaller group today, I guess I'd kind of like to get to know some of the people I've never met before and what their various interests are. And that way we can be more actively engaged in the overall exercise. So let me start with Richard Johnson, if you don't mind going off of mute and telling us a little bit about what yourself and what you do and what your interests are.
Oh, well, greetings from rainy Houston, Texas. And I'm the Sustainability Director at Rice University, and I co-direct the Environmental Studies program. And I've been involved in helping Rice to respond to the pandemic and to help with the phased reintroduction of research and on-campus teaching. So a lot of the topics that I've been hearing about yesterday and today are of deep interest to me, and I must commend the University of Arizona for how well you all have done in your innovative sampling of poop from different buildings. So pleased to be here.
Well, thank you. Do you know Ned Thomas?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, Ned's a good friend. I've done a lot of work with him and the folks over in the Smiley Institute. I don't know if you know Jim Tour, but I do a lot of work with those guys. So Rice University is been very involved in all. In fact, they hosted the very first of the Transcending Incrementalism meetings. So good school. Do a lot of work with it. I'd like to Pam, if you wouldn't mind joining us visibly and coming off of the mute if you're available. I may have caught Pam by surprise. How about Simon Venison? Well, so much for that. Simon.
Sorry, I'm having to turn the light on here. It's 9 o'clock at night. I'm talking from Dubai, so I was sitting on my couch in darkness. I work with SARD, so we're working on a couple of auditing projects for government departments in Dubai. We've spoken before, Steve, about the use of TiO2 control in improving air quality. So we're working on that. We're working with a product called DOTS, which highlights where people have cleaned, the spread of disinfectant, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very interesting. I haven't been in an academic environment for about 20 or 30 years. So it's really interesting hearing all of you. So thank you for allowing me to join your group.
Well, thank you, Simon. I appreciate it. Let me switch over to Saad. Both you and Saad are folks that I've worked together with quite a bit on this. And Saad is actually actively engaged in promoting the idea of protocols that enable the hospitality industry at large to return to some degree of normalcy. Saad, would you like to say something?
Yeah, hi, Steve. Hi, all. Simon also, yes, indeed. Simon works with me as well for, as for Campbell Gray for the hospitality sector. And I thought it would be quite interesting for him to join and to listen to this whole webinar. As you know, we managed to get out of England after 6 months, Steve, and we've come to Dubai finally. Managed to get out, and now it seems like we may have locked England down, so we may be stuck here for a while. So yeah, I mean, we've been talking to Barbara and Ophelia and the rest of the team, because one of the things was, back in April, end of April, beginning of May, we're looking at the processing and thinking hospitality. We're very much involved in the hospitality sector on a global basis. And, I'm seeing different science, different technologies, different systems, and everyone was trying out what they think as an operator would do to bring back customers. And there never seemed to be harmonious systems out there. And one thing that and that's why we started talking, with putting something together. We looked at it, and we've incorporated the traditional cleaning system, which is, like you were saying, the tick boxes. And I think, Professor Gerber, we're also talking with one of your colleagues, Glenn Finkel, as well, because we're utilizing his product here in the UAE as well, and in the UK. So the whole concept of this is to give, we've managed to put something together, what I would call is an A to Z solution, from the cleaning to the process to the system, but it can be to the consumer, and the consumer being the client, the customer, but they can see things, they can start seeing things, let it be on their iPads or let it be on the websites, that they could actually visually see reports. And that's what we've managed to do. And we're about, I would say we're 90% there, literally.
And what do you call it? The Crown?
The Crown Standard Audit.
Crown Standard. Wow. Yeah. That sounds very royal. Well,
it has to, but it had to be royal because everybody was doing their own thing. So we wanted this to sit on top of everything. And, in the Middle East and, everywhere else, the Crown is the top thing at the top. At the end of the day, it's very much, we based it on what we'd use, like in England, which is the MOT, when cars are getting checked every year. But, at the end of the day, there's only one standard, and that's what we're trying to push. And, hence we're trying to enforce this now, rather than having every operator or every company or every business to have their own system or their own product, because we've literally taken the sanitization, the system, the cleaning process, and we're starting now talking to the next level on the AI things, Steve, as well, because I'm trying to get guys at the moment to look at the information that we're gathering, the data that can be incorporated on AI, and AI can be one step ahead of us. So that will be phase 2 or series 2.
The new normal is going to be the ability to gather data meaningfully and employ the data meaningfully. And that comes back to what Brian was saying earlier, is how do we reduce or improve the signal to noise ratio so that we have data that we can reasonably rely upon. And then there was discussions yesterday about the privacy issues. And one of the things that came out of the spring break and all the young students that were off down in Florida, and I guess South Padre Island, perhaps in Texas, they were all congregating and they all had their phones on and they were all talking to each other, and then they all went home and infected everything else. They were the super spreaders. And I'm worried that we're creating a whole bunch of super spreaders as we become more and more inured to the idea that let's just go back to normal and let's assume that 1,000 people a day dying in the United States is okay. That's troubling to me, very troubling, I have to confess. What I would like to do is I'd like to figure out ways in which we can go back to the new normal with some reasonable provisions. Now, one of the things that that Assad mentioned was dots, and that's essentially quantum dots that will report back in a passive way, but not in an obtrusive way. But there are information implications associated with that, and that's part of what we were talking about yesterday. Is how do we take into consideration the rights of a place to do what they want to do? And for instance, if you have a passive device that's in place in your hotel, and it tells you that your hotel is infected, and people have a look-ahead device, such as Saad was talking about, where you can go to your smartphone and look ahead at that hotel and say, "Oh my gosh, that place is infected. I'm not going to go there." Then the hotel says, "Wait a second, that's a commercial intrusion. That's something that adversely affects my business." Or if you go into a restaurant and you have in place passive devices that are telling you what the viral loading is, how do you go about doing that? Does it become a compulsory or a policy decision? Going back to what Brian was saying, do you impose policy requirements that require?
The other problem, there's another problem there is of course, whenever you try to create a system that's controlled from above, it creates an opportunity for innovative people who want to defeat that security, right? And things that self-assemble or are flat are difficult to counterfeit, right? So if somebody owns a system that reports on these hotels, it creates an opportunity for people to control that information if there isn't some way to make sure it's everyone benefits from it being transparent, right?
Yeah.
Like if there's a gatekeeper to information, then the gatekeeper can leverage the arbitrage opportunity, right? And that's sort of unfortunate when it's top-down control. So I think it's important for somehow the transparency to be self-assembling and difficult to deep fake.
Yeah, well, in fact, one of the values, and Assad, you can talk about this, is or Simon, of the DOTS technology is it was originally construed or conceived as a way to prevent counterfeiting. Simon, or Assad, you might want to say something about that.
I mean, Brian, listen, I hear you, but the thing is, you know, one of the things that you're talking about communications, and we're seeing a lot of negative communication, and we're seeing a lot of, I mean, I'll give you a very straight example, which personally happened. I mean, we've been locked in the UK for 6 months, and finally, you know, we had to get on an airplane and go through the whole transiting, you know, experience. And, you know, first of all, going through the airports, let it be from London and is all Dubai, is a very, very strange feeling, very strange. Now, sitting on an airplane, going back, you know, all the crew, all the cabin were dressed from head to toe like Ghostbusters. I mean, they were completely armed, from PPE, you know, everything. While you know, passengers, there wasn't a lot of passengers, you know, on a 777 plane, there were only 35 passengers on it, but everybody was exposed because the only thing they gave him was a mask, and that's all we had. Where's the confidence in that? You know, that's what I want to see. You know, where is the confidence in that? You want normality to return? How can normality return when you're seeing this? You know, and that carried on, you know, for the whole experience, landing into the UAE, landing into Dubai, and so on. You know, there's two sides of this, and the point is, you know, there's not enough information out there. There's the consumers, the people, the clients, the customers. There's not enough real information to tell them what they need to know, what they need to see. Plus, the worst thing I saw is when I was seeing, you know, arriving into arrivals, and in the airport, you have, again, people dressed from head to toe, going around spraying and cleaning. Now, why should you go dressed around, what are you doing? Why do you have to dress in PPE, like in a big white boiler suit with mask and gloves and everything else, while there's normal passengers and normal people walking around you and you're spraying? But where's the confidence in that one as well? So again, there's a lot of, mixed confusion. That's why, normality will never be returned if there's things like this out there. I can't see bringing my children or anyone else's children coming through destinations or into an airport or into a hotel or into, society. So, and then the information that you're talking about, that can be very easily managed and controlled, and you can layer it to who has access to it and who doesn't have access to it. So I think we have a long way to go. It's about educating, and there needs to be, we are going to live with the COVID. We are going to live with this for a while. But the point is, we need to be rightful educate. We need to educate correctly. Right now, I don't see the right education. This is my experience, my personal experience, going from one country to another and going through that whole process and seeing that. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Sad. Oh, please. Sad, may I ask? This is Milana. I'm from Stanford. It's really interesting that you're working on this set of standards. May I ask, do you envision those more as a guide for businesses? Kind of like an industry, what here in the US, what industry-wide associations do. For example, I'm consulting to the movie industry, and they're kind of developed a set of protocols for safe filming that they use, or kind of for everybody's benefit. So you do it once, and so every hotel chain or every movie studio doesn't have to kind of reinvent the wheel. Or are you envisioning more as a certification kind of by the government to reassure the clients? Or what is that thing you're working on? Sounds really.
Yeah, no, I'll give you the, in a nutshell, basically. What we did, because we are mainly in the hospitality, our hospitality business, F&B business and so on. And that's what we looked at. We know the business inside out. We looked at the cleaning processes. Which is today, globally, most hospitality or most cleaning companies, they do things manually, and it's a pure on a clipboard, and they tick it and they sign it off and so on. So we took that, and with my team, we've created an app. And first of all, that app is online now. It goes we put it onto the cloud, sort of thing. And then after that, there's a whole process. There's a whole process of checking the technology. But then we've included monitors, where monitors can be included, and then utilizing various scientific, chemical, whatever you want to call them. We are talking, referring to the TiO2s. We are referring to the UV lights, implementing VAM system and everything else. But now, what we've seen when we came here and we've been talking to other governments, and to be honest, it's what I would call now, it's like different modules now, because we've been talking to the transportation system here now. So what we've said to them is, you tell us, we want the whole process of the transportation, how you clean it. We can take it and we can redesign the app based on that. And then all of a sudden, everybody can have access. You can have full access. For example, we're talking about, let's say, a carriage or a room. We know exactly how many points all the cleaning points are. We will know exactly how long it will take, let's say 20 minutes to clean a room. Then with that person who goes in, they logged in. We know if they spend more time out, the questions have to be asked. The whole point is trying to avoid the shortcut, the human error. And then we can self-audit by sending another crew, with the quantum dots and everything else, to find out if they did clean or not. We could do that randomly. And this is part of the educational system, because once people know we got this behind, it's all about literally getting used to it and adapting to it and following the rules. We need people to start following rules. No more, avoiding the shortcuts, because there is a system, there is something that's watching them. And that can be at different levels. Let it be the managers, let it be supervisors. But we've also, the idea is that we can make it available to the government, so they can have access if they wanted to. So it's a different layer of, admin that we could apply it to. And it doesn't stop. I mean, we started off with the hotels as the initial, but right now we've created it. We've managed to do it we're doing it for for the metro in the UAE, in Dubai. So we're redoing the whole module for them. So it becomes like a plug and play, depending on what type of system. So you're talking about the movie theaters. We could do exactly the same. The whole process is the same, but we will just need to sit down and talk to the team and evaluate it. But again, and there is, the technology is moving forwards, and I can see it happening. I mean, and that's what I'm saying is, the AI will kick into it as well once there's enough data into the system as well. But right now, the process is literally, it's an auditing system, it's a cleaning system, it's to reduce the human error factor, but at the same time, it can be monitored. And at the same time, there is, the TiO2, which is in the background, which is working under the UV lights and the sanitization and so on.
Oh.
I mean, there is, we can go to the next level, and the next level is getting it into the ventilation systems and so on. But that's all, I don't think that's phase one, that's phase two, phase three. Once you've convinced people that it works.
Alana, one of the things that we've identified as very interesting and that we're pursuing is the idea that standards may not be quite the right way to look at this. It's maybe more of a framework because, for instance, the hotel industry is so uneven. There are extraordinary hotels and there are more pedestrian hotels, but both can provide a very safe environment. But you have to have a framework that has different sets of principles and characteristics that have to have a process defined probably by that hotel system or that provider that is clearly defined, testable, and will be able to be reviewed and certified in some way. And so it's got to be built on the kind of risk sort of approach that Kelly Reynolds, who works with Chuck, assesses, which is, for instance, a product like SOD has, which is the titanium dioxide, the TiO2 product, which is very effective, might provide a certain percentage of risk reduction of contracting COVID. But that is further enhanced by other practices that surround that. And like the app that SOD is talking about. And so what you need in a framework is to understand how these pieces are additive. And so we're working with an outside entity that is very used to building these types of frameworks in order and being able to scale those to not only hospitality but other industries in order to think about how we can make that a more rational way of approaching this.
Yeah, in fact, one of the things that Milana, with your upside down triangle, looking at the things that we can do, and it layers against some of the things that SOD's talking about and that Barbara was just talking about, is how do we look at each level in that triangle, coming back to what SOD was saying of phase one and phase two. I do think, at least from my perspective, that it's important for us to have a set of protocols that are based on I guess, human interactions, because the bottom line is people are still going to interact and kids are still going to hug each other even when they're sick. And maybe more, because that's what college kids do. There's a lot of reasons why we need to be mindful of the circumstances in which people behave in the built environment. and the degree to which they are part of the built environment. Coming back to the idea of personal protective equipment, and there are things that we can do, but people don't like to wear masks, asks the President of the United States, who seems to not understand that there's a public policy that he sort of represents, or maybe he doesn't think he does. But the bottom line is that there are other things that we can do, and this comes to what Alethea was talking about, and the things that Alethea didn't talk about that she is involved in and does, and that is making different surfaces and different, even different materials. If you think about the clothing that you're wearing and the number of bugs, Chuck, I'd be interested if you've ever checked people's clothing. You mentioned your underwear sticking to your the bottom line is that your clothing actually is a pretty good trap for a lot of viruses and bacteria. And if we could make clothing or treatments for clothing that were virucidal or bactericidal, that would be helpful. And then the other thing I'd like to explore further is what are the potential for natural type of cosmetics, natural viricides. Which I want to throw open the idea of yesterday we were talking about fresh air. And I'd like to figure out, Saad, I don't know if your hotels are all closed environments, but one thing that drives me crazy when I get into a Marriott hotel, I can't open any of the windows. I'm literally a prisoner in their hotel, and the air that I breathe is the air that I'm forced to breathe. Is there any thought of going to more open air situations in hotels and opening up the windows?
No, I mean, I think, Steve, that's again, we're talking about the old school and insurance and all this situation that's happened in the past with the high rise and so forth, trying to keep, number one, the efficiency, and then number two, the security aspect of it all. But now we're talking the way we talk with designers, and today they will be more user friendly. They will have windows open, but also I don't think in this part of the world where they're building green built properties and projects, everything I've seen, windows will open, and they do want that environment to happen as well. But it's just what was happening, what was built, what you see, what we've seen is buildings which went up in the 70s and 80s, and that's just that, that was a trend then, and everybody was trying to be safe and conscious, sadly.
Yeah,
but I can't see it carrying on. No.
Yeah.
Also, in those times, it's very difficult to balance those buildings if you had all those allowing people to open and close windows, right? You need more control on airflows, essentially. And if you get a hydrostatic effect or a stack effect in a tall building, crazy things happen if everyone's open and closing windows, and you need a lot more controls on your zones flows, and maybe was the limitation in the past.
Yeah, I mean, to pick up on that and what Steve was referring to, there's, potentially this, different ways to really think about building design in the future, especially around, airflow, thermal conditioning, and now maybe even micro biome, that we really should be thinking about moving towards kind of direct individual human bioadaptive systems, and having the agency for individuals to really, engage with that would engage with that environment directly, and those kind of adaptive controls directly, because our demographics, our physiologies are entirely different, right? Across the spectrum of age, across the spectrum of, physiological features. So how we condition spaces right now through central controls and management might be, moving more in a direction towards distributed controls and distributed conditions, and kind of linking that up with how architects and engineers are thinking about the spatial and material environments. And then I also just want to add that there's a lot of, around this notion of engineering controls, we've been talking a lot about the direct SARS-CoV-2, how do we kind of treat that? How do we intervene that with engineering controls? But there's actually a lot of indirect impacts happening as well. So for instance, with buildings that are not being occupied for long periods of time, or we're actually reducing the occupancy to 50% in the future from what they are now, our water systems are going to be like, so I have a research project going right now through the Wet Center, which is funded through NSF and Tucson Water. And we're actually looking at integrated plumbing sensing controls that we can, test the water quality based on different flow rates, and volumes and different plumbing materials. Because there's a lot of other kind of potential side effects of health impacts related to our infrastructure and our buildings as a result of how we're shifting our function, in this post-pandemic kind of situation.
Yeah, well, one of the things, and by the way, I was just going to mention, we were originally scheduled to take a break right about now, but I'm going to just keep on keeping on if everybody will able to stay with us, and we'll just run until we run out. One of the things that we used to worship in 1977 was the energy crisis, and we all bowed before the energy altar, where we were going to conserve energy at all costs, even if we ruined our environment to the point that nobody could stand to live in the cave that we've consigned ourselves to. And caves are very energy efficient, but I'll be darned if I want to live in one. LEEDs, which is a thing that infects our engineering design right now. And I'm sorry if I sound very cynical about LEEDs, but I've had to design buildings that meet LEEDs criteria, which I think are total nonsense, that don't take into consideration what sustainability could potentially mean. And we talked yesterday about return on investment and how return on investment has been focused entirely on cash flow and cash flow in the near term to that point. And it can take into consideration reductions in lost time. It can take into consideration, and perhaps should take into consideration, when people go crazy and bring a machine gun to work. Maybe it's the built environment that is having an impact on them. So I guess I'd like to talk about the things that Saad just mentioned, that physical security and as Brian said, the control of airflow, worshipped at the altar of let's get an efficient building at the expense of the people who are having to occupy it. So I'm wondering if, and I hope I'm scratching a scab that's associated with LEEDs. I know all of you, LEEDs is probably a wonderful thing, but there are flaws to it.
I just want to, one comment while you're on that is there's not just the occupants of the building, but there's the workers in the building. And one of the things we have to watch out for too is we create a system of supervision of the workers who do all this cleaning that might not necessarily promote happy and sane people, if you pardon the expression. And I've just come from discussions at the university where we are, where there's really draconian cutbacks, and the administration is bringing in more and more AI and automated supervision of the workers at a more granular level. So people are seeing stopwatches on their screen where their activities and clerical processes are taking place, and little hourglasses going by, and some things that look like good ideas in terms of the improvement in quality, and we have to also keep in mind that there are these workers who are going to have to do this unless we automate it completely, which might actually be the jump that needs to happen.
Well, and we may never get to the point where we're fully automated. I guess one of the things, when I used to run a national lab, they came up with this crazy app called Ergo Buddy. And it would shut down your computer. And you'd have to go up and go do jumping jacks for about 5 minutes, and then your computer would come back on if you showed that you'd worked out enough. Well, that just really pissed me off. I hated Ergo Buddy. there are things that I think that people contrive that are really disruptive in the way we do. Every individual has a different way of attacking the work that they do. And the point that you were making relates back to what Saad was saying about, you see these people walking around the airport and they're in moon suits. And then there are people walking through the airport and they're going, wait a second, they're in moon suits and I'm walking by. How at risk am I? How can you not be subject to that, I guess?
Well, I mean, that's not too different than the X-ray technician, right? It's just a question of exposure, but that's hard to communicate to the person walking through the airport, right? The person who has to clean all the toilets is exposed to a broader sort of portfolio of viruses than the people who walk through the airport once, right? But,
yeah. Well, and the other thing is that if this guy who's got the moon suit on, is his moon suit bactericidally covered? Is he transporting the bugs from where? I mean, he could be the super spreader.
Yeah, or he reaches under his mask, right?
Yeah.
So Saad, no, it's a really interesting discussion. I don't know. Ultimately, I feel like if we like what the French restaurateur did, if you build a really good, safe environment, and if it gets certified, ultimately, I feel like people will come. But with Saad, it's really interesting, fascinated by what you're doing. So the apps that you're developing, this is more for the use, are you trying to address the pain points, like who are the customers for your apps? Like how are you integrating those apps in whatever you're doing, and kind of what exact pain points are you addressing that, you're so immersed in the hotel industry?
No, I mean, the app is, I'm muted. The app is initially, the first part of it is regarding the cleaning process, and anything which is a human error, the human factor, anything on the human factor side, we've made it onto a tablet, or a device that they will be carrying on. That can be taken on board, and that can be monitored live by supervisor managers and so forth. And then from there onwards, I mean, we know, you'll know the process, and everything else on respect on that one. But then out of that, we are doing other forms of testing, which is like random tests. And these random tests will also be fed to the device. And then at the same time, what we are showing to the end client, I mean, we're showing that it's being cleaned. We're showing that it's been, the time, date, and everything else. But what the most important is that we're taking readings of the rooms, and we're taking the VOC meetings and so forth, the temperatures and everything else. These are which are being transmitted to the end client or the customer. So, but what we're also doing is that we've created this, is that we're providing a service in which that on a monthly basis we can go back and doing an audit, and we do random checks and making sure that everyone is following the protocol, following the procedures, and so forth.
How can you make sure that the app, sorry for my very naive perhaps question, how can you make sure that whoever's cleaning the room is actually following the protocol rather than just hanging out in the room?
Well, because, that's a nice one. Because at the moment, no, it's a good one, because we know, for example, let's say cleaning a room, you have, let's call it 200 points of cleaning, and we know exactly the time, how long that should take. It shouldn't, more 25 minutes, 30 minutes, we'll know exactly. So, and this is what we're talking about earlier on about the, later on the AI will kick into it and so on. We'll be monitoring this. But when we see somebody going in and we see somebody coming out, they should have done it in that period of time. There's plus or minus questions. It will ring a bell. It will give an alert. That's number one. And this is what we're talking about in the early stages. In the early stages, it's all about, ensure it's the re-educational of the staff, or re-educational of the cleaning crew. But then at the same time, and going back to the quantum dots, we can go back in at any time on that room and on a black light, and see and do random checks on that room to find out if they actually did clean or they missed out anything. And that's, that can be done immediately.
So how do you check that?
With quantum dots. They actually use this quantum dots that were developed at Rice University by Jim Tour, in fact, just for real-time development. But what it does is it fluoresces when you hit it with UV.
I
And
got
it'll tell you where the bugs are.
I got you.
Well, it'll also tell you where it hasn't been cleaned, because what we've got it now down to the dots is mixed with a cleaning solution, so we could easily see, and then also at the same time we can have different color of fluorescence. So, for example, week one is blue, week two's red, and so on. We'll see which colors in all of this. So, these are the things, and it's all about literally. It's a re-education of the people. I mean, that's what we're going to have to do.
I gotcha. Yeah, we do similar thing in the healthcare field when we're testing out our protocols for hygiene. So yeah, not as fancy, but same idea. Huh. Okay. And so your customers, so the app is mostly for the customers, or the the people who are going to stay in the room, or the managers?
Yeah, no, let me expand on that as well, because one of the things is that everybody's working towards a 2030 vision. 2030 vision is about the clean air, and so on, the emissions. And in this part of the world, in Europe it's very difficult to manage, but in this part of the world they're really pushing for it and they're trying to do it, and this is where we can enforce it. The app is for both. The app, the information we can select. For example, let's say you take a hotel and you go on the website. Currently, at the moment, on the website, you'll have a homepage, and then you'll have temperature, you'll have local temperature, local currency, and maybe local news. But right now, we could feed from that to their website. We could put up the air quality of inside the hotel rather than not just the outside of the hotel, so they'll know that this hotel is within the standards, and we're going by the 2030 vision of, well, there's a policy which came out as the Dubai 400, for example, but this is the same for all. There is standards, and what we are doing is the guidelines for that hotels, for all of them, for the whole industry, really.
So the standards, and then you're forcing, because I'm fascinated particularly by the idea of the standards for the industry, because I feel like those could be useful not just for the hotel. I mean, this could be useful for many industries.
Yeah, correct.
How do you go about the whole setting the standard? Is it just a bunch of hotel chains band together, like for example, industry,
no, I mean,
and establish the standards and protocols, or how do you?
Yeah, no, we're trying. I mean, obviously, the first phase is the hotels, but then there's other businesses it can also incorporate. But again, you're absolutely right. Not all hotels will, because especially the bigger franchise brands, the US brands, they have their own policy. We've approached Marriott, and Marriott is very, but at the end of the day, there's a lot happening in this part of the world where it becomes a lot easier to bring it in and saying, enabled to do this. I'll give you an example. I mean, listen, Dubai has a transiting passengers per year on an 80 million tourists fly through here. Right now, that number is nothing. It's nothing. There's enough hotels here, and they're all empty. They need to bring people back. So at the end of the day, something has to be enforced and something has to be done. But it's literally, we call it the standard, but it's an audit. It could be, different types of frameworks where like Barbara was saying. But at the end of the day, it's a process. For me, it's a process. It's an A to Z process, which comes from the cleaning to the management to the compliance to the confidence, and that's what it can be done. And it can be replicated through any industry you want it to.
I know, it seems to me like in order to bring people back, I think people are now afraid to stay in the hotels because of people know that this can spread, through the air conditioning systems and so forth. So if you build it right, or if you change it correctly, you have it certified, but some kind of independent, trusted certifying agency, then the people might come then.
We're working on that one as well. We are working on that. We are talking, with two separate agencies on that as well.
Are there agencies that certify that issue certifications currently?
I mean, I'll give you an indication the thing is, because it's not just one procedure, it's a combination of procedures which we've combined together. So the agencies that have looked at it, they said they're looking at it, but they're looking at it in phases. So so rather than as a complete, they'll look at this and say, yes, this A with B and C, they'll up to the point. You know, they can certify them separately.
And other certified agencies there now? I mean, other global agencies? What are those agencies? I mean,
there is, but everyone is doing the paperwork version, and they're auditing, and they refer back to literally back to the paperwork. And you know, we're talking about certifying it, and you know, a month later they'll do. You know, they'll come back and say, "Are you still doing the same? Tick the right boxes," and so on.
yeah, I mean, for example, you know, there are credit rating agencies, you know, that certify people, you know, if they can have good credits. I wonder if there are such agencies and what they are for, you know, your industry.
So we're working with the British Standards Institute, BSI. They have a very nice American presence, and BSI is interested in this framework or kite mark type approach. To kite mark type approach, which is understood in the UK. It's not understood here. Menke Van Zandt, who's on the team, is going to be speaking tomorrow about the circular economy, not about this, but she's part of the team that we're speaking to on this subject.
One of the things I think
on these things is on that transparency piece, right? What Sad was talking about, because what we saw with the mortgage fiascos in 2008 was it was actually the credit agencies that were the problem. And if you have a transparent system, so not only are the owners able to look at it, you know, you sort of have an open source auditing, prevent somebody from getting on the other side of it. And then leveraging that arbitrage, like I said before, you know, like what we saw with the bond rating agencies in 2008, right? So you have it so that it's open source.
And that's
will
what's
make
so
it, right?
Yeah, that's what's so nice about this kite mark type approach, is that the provider supplies all the information about how they're meeting framework. And so it's up there and it's very transparent.
And is that a governmental agency, the British?
No, it's private, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a value to what Brian was just talking about, though, in an open source type of validation where you if you have sensors that are uncounterfeitable, but sensors that are actually reliable as well and can be distributed in ways that enable us to get the right information in the right place at the right time. And then Chuck, I'd like to poll you on, is it credible for us to develop air sensors that can give us viral loadings or bacterial loadings that might be meaningful? And then I guess the second question is, just because we have a viral loading doesn't mean we have there's millions of viruses. Some of them are bad for us, not all of them.
Well, I don't know any good viruses that infect you, but if there's a good one, I'd like to know.
Well, there's a bunch of them out there that don't affect us.
Yeah,
but you know, some of these viruses are only dangerous when their DNA is there, and if we're detecting their RNA, like that's what we're doing. You know, you can get a lot of false positives, right?
Yeah, I think I don't know how you develop a sensor for the viruses. You know, we've been trying to do it for water for 50 years, and we come up with nothing because you don't have the sensitivity. You have to realize even one virus has the potential of causing an illness. Probability may be low, but it's not zero. The minimum infectious dose is an incorrect statement. That's what's takes 50% of the people infected. So I think being able to develop sensors for the air for viruses, I don't see it being done. It hasn't been done for water yet. And you would have to find very few viruses in a huge volume of air to have a very big impact. So I don't think we're going to see that anytime soon. It'd be great if we could, but I don't see that coming.
Yeah.
Now you might have sensors for surrogates for the viruses, might be, but not for the can't find one virus in a liter of air with a sensor.
Yeah, I mean, there was actually a giant project funded by the US government called Project BioShield, which was aimed at detecting bioterrorism type agents in the air. And it was massively expensive and was fraught with air. It gave a ton of false positives because, would pick up like the plague that ground squirrels would carry. Anyway, there were just a lot of issues with it and with interpretation, with usability. It was a failed project that was done about 20 years ago. Project BioShield.
Yeah, that's a good point. Also, there are at least several hundred viruses transmitted by air and an estimated 100,000 yet to be discovered. So I'm not sure that's going to yield a lot of information. I think what one of the things is we largely talked about building confidence with cleaning procedures and monitoring people. That's been done in hospitals a lot, and we still have hospital-acquired infections. So I think we have to really look at, we can tell people we're doing all this, but it hasn't been working in hospitals very well, or nursing homes that I work in, or health clinics. So just a procedure is not going to do it itself. I've been involved in outbreaks where norovirus, where they come in and they made it worse by spreading everything around. I mean, cleaning tools are going to be one thing, but I think what we've done, I'll give you an example. We put viruses in a hotel room, in a hotel, the maid spread the viruses to the next 3 rooms she cleaned. So she did it very good. We monitored, but she didn't have the right cleaning tools, the right disinfectant, the right procedure in that. So they can make it worse, is my big concern with this. And we've done the same thing, put a virus in one countertop in a hotel room and a person bring it to the conference and spread it all over the place. So I think what you need to do is build confidence. I'm doing all this. In some ways, I've seen more cleaning makes it worse. If you don't use the right cleaning tools and right products, that's the other aspect of it. You can clean all you want. And actually, a cloth towel will be great for spreading things around. And you have to have a clean towel. We collected towels that are used for disinfecting in hospitals here. 4 of them had E. coli in them, and other fecal bacteria, because they're so thick. They couldn't get rid of it all. The other thing is that this is a chance, of course, for innovative products like self-disinfectant products, developing barriers, multiple barrier, sticky products. That's a good idea. It's interesting. You brought that up, Steve. We did epidemiological studies on continuously acting disinfecting surfaces. And we found we had a pretty big impact on the common ones, but we were amazed that this product also reduced the number of cases of Clostridium difficile, which surprised us because the disinfectant didn't work against that. But it's a positively charged disinfectant. So our guess is it made the C. diff stick to the walls in that. And so we ended up with fewer clinical cases. So that's not out of the range of it. And you can verify those products by putting it on a surface and putting your finger on it, see if it doesn't come off. Because we've tried it, haven't been successful yet with a product. But that way you get away from putting disinfectants all the time, maybe more environmentally friendly. But I think a combination of strategies are needed, and then a demonstration that you're not spreading things around, that you're actually reducing the probability of illness. The same thing, we talked a lot about models with air has been my one thing, is I've been looking at it, and we really need models to show how the viruses behave in aerosols and how they spread and how they stick. I know we put viruses in couches because we had some cases with couches being involved with skin infections, and they act like a microbial whoopee cushion. You sit down and then all the viruses go flying everywhere, into the air, everywhere, all over the person. Influenza, we found, will survive 24 hours in a couch. And so what my suggestion is not only air movement, but viral resuspension. It'll be deposited. It can be resuspended by people walking on floors, we found out in our work. So it's a much more complicated thing to do. And that's why I'm more tracer using viruses, non-pathogenic to humans, and yield us more data. In an office, the area where most viruses are exchanged is the coffee break room. You are safer having a cup of coffee in the toilet in an average room in an office than the office room, because people spread germs and gossip at the same time. And the reason is your hands are on the coffee table, you're touching the coffee pot. We put viruses on a person's hand entering a building, and within 4 hours, it's on 50% of the people's hands and surfaces. I'm sorry, I won't say anymore.
Well, actually, you bring up a really excellent point about integrating what SOD is doing with what you're talking about. It's not just the cleaning, it's the cleaning protocol and the cleaning tools that you use, but it's also the cleaning methods, because if you're wiping your gloved hand over something and then you touch your now contaminated gloved hand all over something else, you're just spreading the virus, and the glove has done you no good at all. So I think that's really a really important consideration.
You mentioned the germiest part of your clothes, by the way, before I forget, it's your hips. Never slap anybody on the hip, because that's the germiest part, because that's where your hands are all the time.
Well, and hips don't lie.
Yeah, no, they sure don't.
Nancy,
Yeah.
like
this good thing I'm not a germaphobe, because this conversation would really be difficult to listen to, and I would never go out into the world. But it actually links in with a comment, because we're human beings that have immune systems, and they were created because the world is filled with germs. And that, I mean, some things you just don't really want to know about, frankly. So I'm just wondering, there is a threshold, obviously. You can't, these are not hospital rooms where you're operating on people. I mean, these are places that we are, we're tourists, we're sleeping on beds, we're sitting on couches, we're sitting at tables, we're meeting people in coffee shops and so on. And so one wonders, is there a line? And again, this is about confidence and people coming into spaces, but and these are nuanced discussions too, that the general public may not understand. Their desire may be, let's have it like a hospital operating room, as opposed to, this is a reasonable level of, I mean, this is what, we live in a germy world, and like, how do you communicate that, and at what level is a certain amount of germs just the way the world is? So this is what I'm thinking about as you're speaking.
Yeah, no, it's actually a really good point, Nancy. Because actually, I mean, you're joking that I don't know any good viruses, but you know what? We're built to deal with viruses and bacteria. And in fact, one of the theories of increased allergies in our society is that our society is too clean. So I guess one of my worries about, I'm thinking like we could just blast everything with UV lights and have it be sterile environment. But honestly, I think then our risk of allergies and autoimmune diseases will go up. So it's like, exactly to your point, how do you maintain that balance?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that Prasad and his team has pointed out is we don't want to kill the microbiome.
Exactly.
The microbiome is our friend.
Yeah.
And how we enlist the microbiome to help us is very important. So if we attack everything surrounding us, we'll live in a truly sterile environment where we're.
I would see that as a worry. There are plenty of, I think people think you're sterilizing the world, but products are largely defined, are aimed at the pathogens.
Yeah.
And you just have to get them to a certain level. You're always gambling with germs. The idea is to keep it in your favor. Nobody's talking about a sterile world here. What we know, by using the right products and combinations and cleaning, we can reduce it to a level where the probability of it is low. So it's a probability game. And the idea is to have the right structures, the right products to keep the probability low of you coming into with a pathogen level. So that's a balance that we're looking. But I think what we just need to do is quantify that better than we have. And so we can give people like Saad say, well, we know by doing this, the risk is totally minimized, or it's safer than your home is probably, most 80% of all foodborne illness occurs in the home, by the way. It's safer to eat out than to eat at home. If your odds are because people just don't have good practice. You can't say that to people because they get insulted, but that's the statistics tell you that. So but we have to do the same thing as the confidence, like going to a hotel in reality is probably going to be safer than home in those same activities. Or we could say it's as safe as your home, because people get insulted if you compare it that the home isn't that good. But anyway, I would like to say that your risk is you're safe as it being at home, because I think we can do that through modeling and efforts and studies, that we can make a hotel room safer, really, I feel, than your home, because I know how to control it.
But at home, at least you're exposed to a ton of fine. You might be exposed to more organisms at home, but they're at least your organisms that your immune system has already dealt with. So
That's right. That's why I don't do anybody else's laundry.
It's a good point. Well, one of the things that somebody pointed out to me is the steering wheel in your car is probably as contaminated as the sponge.
No, actually, it's the air. It's the where your air vents take in. What's the front thing in your car? I can't remember the name of it. But I've done studies on the microbiology of cars before, and it's the child seat, your coffee cup holder, and the dashboard, because microbes impact the dashboard as being sucked into the ventilation system. So the steering wheel is not that bad, actually. No, I just don't touch that kid's car seat, because he probably pooped in it. Actually, I can actually tell where a car comes from. If you're living in Chicago, the microbiology is the same as a refrigerator. If you're living in Florida, it's the same as a sauna. In fact, I drove a cart where I could tell where a car was by its microbiome.
Well, that's interesting.
So I have to ask this question because I've often wondered about it coming from Canada, where, you know, you get into a car and it's absolutely an ice cube, as opposed to here in Tucson, which has been sitting in the sun for, you know, in Canadian terms, you know, 45 degrees Celsius for, you know, for 2 days. So which is safer?
The Tucson car. We've actually studied groceries. We put in cars in that, and the car, shopping carts, give you an example. They're almost sterile in Arizona because the sunlight gets them. But shopping carts is the best thing. Is your odds of finding E. coli on a shopping cart handle is about 80% in Maine versus about 0 in Tucson, because they get sterilized. Actually, what's worse is your bathroom towels. We've collected bathroom towels in Quebec. I don't know if that's typical in Canada, but bathroom towels are far germier after washing, because they're humid and they're thick, and the bacteria tend to grow in your humid environment. So if you want to dry with a towel, make sure they came from Tucson. Don't, because we collected towels door to door from homes to get an idea what it was like. But,
wow. I don't know how you move through the world, Chuck, because I would. Oh my gosh.
What merits consideration is coming back to the idea of how do we look at the built environment and the public spaces in which we operate. Chuck, you made the point that the hospital is the best place to go to get sick.
Yeah.
I think that that's because it's like the old joke about the bank robber who asked him why he robs banks. He says that's where they keep the money. A hospital seems to be where they keep the germs. So the bottom line, though, is how do we rethink not only what the current built environment is, but how do we build the new built environment? And we bemoan the fact that a lot of these facilities are inherited from prior generations and different emphasis, especially those things built in the 70s, where the emphasis was on energy efficiency. And I'd like to get those of you who are leads experts to talk a little bit about how do we balance sustainability and an environment in which we can deal with the potential for pandemic exposure. And I'm not sure that they're compatible.
Steve, I'm not a lead expert. However, I would like to make an observation about our participants today and about the the needs for the kinds of research that their specific presentations have created. In the built environment, and this is an observation I've made a number of times, we tend to live in silos. And LEED is a great example of a checklist that was well intended, but demonstrated all the painful repercussions of living in silos. It was not a checklist that was developed from a transdisciplinary approach to built environment research. And with the work that Milana is doing, the work that Chuck is doing, the work that Brian is doing and Alethea are doing is all work that cries out for and is only well executed if we have conversations that include people who understand policy, people who understand behavior, people who understand more disciplines than our own personal discipline and skill set that we were created with. And the more that we can expand the scope of what we have traditionally called built environment research, the more well-informed future attempts at sustainable practices in buildings like the LEED checklist will be. So I'm off my soapbox now.
Well, no, I think that's kind of an important point, is that LEEDs was focused on energy. And it became the singular thing against which you measured the efficacy of a building. And when you talk about sustainability, maybe these old buildings that had windows that opened, maybe those weren't so bad. Back in the old days, there was a value in getting fresh air because we didn't have air conditioning.
So, hey, Steve.
I think it's a bit of a mischaracterization to say that LEED is just focused on energy. And in fact, recently it's become quite a bit more common to see LEED married up with the WELL standard, which was talked about yesterday as well. And LEED has also certainly improved a lot over recent versions. But really, I think it's sort of how you use that tool, which is really important. If you go in with just a metrics mindset rather than thinking about what am I actually trying to do, what are the values and what is the mission I'm trying to pursue with this particular project. If you don't start there, and if you just treat LEED like a compliance, then that's the quality of what you're going to end up with, which is sort of as bad as you've allowed yourself to be. So I wanted to make that point, and also just to, maybe I'm going to try to carry the flag a little bit here for energy efficiency, but we are in a climate crisis that is going to potentially render several of our cities potentially at times of the year close to uninhabitable in my children's lifetime. So we do need to keep that in mind too.
Well, I actually applaud your point there. And having spent 50 years in the energy business, I'm very on board with the idea. One of the points you make is really, really important. And I'm glad that you brought it out. I used to be a vice president of Lockheed Martin. And I still advise Lockheed Martin on all of their environmental cleanup. And we build buildings that we try to make LEED, we try to get LEED certification. Lockheed Martin, unfortunately, takes an incorrect interpretation of LEEDs and singularly focuses on a checklist approach to it, as opposed to looking at it from the perspective of what is the overall objective. And I'm really glad you brought this point up, because that's my pet peeve with LEEDs, is the incorrect interpretation of it. And Jim Beiser's on. Jim is the air head. I'll let you talk about air for a second, Jim. But the whole point there is that resilience, as opposed to the old term of sustainability, which gets interpreted in terms of how much cash does it generate, because everybody says, all right, well, the sustainability is only possible if it's marketable and if you can sell it. And it's more than that. So let me get the dialogue headed that direction, because we can't forget climate change is real, and climate change is driven by our energy consumption.
So I will talk about air. I'll probably do that at the closing. You and Barbara have asked me to do a closing, so when that time comes. But to react a little bit to this specific conversation, and I agree with Richard, leads, at least since I've been around, since it's been around, because I've been around a little bit longer, it's improved dramatically since the very beginning. However, I can tell you that those of us who know it know how to game the system. And so, for example, the building that I work in, a beautiful building, one of our newer buildings is LEED Platinum. And I remember when we were missing just a few points for Platinum. So we all got together and decided that the easiest way to do it is to add bathrooms with showers on every floor. Because we got extra points. That way people would be encouraged to ride their bikes, park their bikes, go in and take a shower and go to class. Those showers are seldom if ever used. And so, but we did get the points and we got Platinum. So you can game the system. The other main point, and this is really to I think to your point, Richard, it isn't so much about the machine, it's who's driving and how you're driving it. So the manager of the building, the people, the occupants of the building can play a very important role on how well it does. We have LEED buildings that when it comes right down to the energy audits, operate frankly worse than some of the buildings that aren't anywhere on the formula. And here's why. It's like my wife, when I drive her Prius, she gets back in and she gets all pissed off because I've messed up her MPG. Well, that's because I stomp on the gas because that's what my foot does. And so her miles per gallon, her mileage is much lower than the way she drives it. She's taken that vehicle and is driving it the way it's intended to, and she gets the return that is intended. So it's who drives, I think is really very, very important when it comes to the buildings. I think so as with a few criticisms, it's way, way better than what we had. The last thing I'll say is that, in order to get a LEED Platinum or better than, or whatever we are doing now, it costs a little bit more in upfront costs, because you're putting bathrooms in or whatever, all the various things that we're doing. Where our mistake is that when it comes to finance a building, we look at the cost of building the building, not the cost of owning the building for 50 years. That building's going to be around for 50 to 100 years. There are websites where you can, back to cars, where you can compare the cost of ownership of the car over a period of 5 years. And that's the comparison that you use, not just initial cost of the car. It's insurance and maintenance and gas mileage and things like that. So I think that a big improvement could be in moving us into the direction where our built environment is in fact more efficient, is to educate the people who sort of issue the bonds, the people who are finance people, and start counting what it costs to own the building for the life of the building, not the initial cost only.
Yeah, what I'd like to do now is we've got a lot of folks that are getting ready to sign off. Brian, I'd like to thank you. I know that you were, if you're still with us, I'd like to thank you for joining, and I'd like to encourage you to rejoin our Thursday meetings. Your perspective is really important.
Thanks very much.
The rest of you are already on, so I really appreciate your participation. Saad, I will circle back with you on this. Saad's got some very important points that I think that Saad and Simon are employing that I'd like to get more generally embraced. In particular, the point that you make, Brian, about open source embrace rather than having an authoritarian top-down application where if everybody's using the Crown system because it's the best system, it's a little bit like everybody trades in dollars just because you can rely on dollars. And if you're using the Crown protocol, we need to make sure the Crown protocol is refined to the point that Chuck is talking about, where you're using, instead of using the same sponge in every bathroom, which I can imagine get pretty nasty. I hate to think of the sponge that I wash my dishes with.
Don't. The germiest thing in your house, there's more E. coli in your sponge than in the toilet.
And then I eat off those dishes. So.
Yeah. It's actually in the average home, it's safer to make a sandwich on a toilet seat than a cutting board because there's more E. coli on the average cutting board in the house than a toilet seat. And that's what our studies say. Publish that. So
you're blowing up all of our assumptions, Chuck.
yeah, right. Yeah. But don't worry, there's no butt-borne diseases. You're okay.
Well, you know, that's the thing that always amuses me. When Debbie goes into the bathroom, she'll spend a half an hour putting down what she calls her butt gasket.
Yeah. Well, actually, 48% of all women will wipe a public toilet seat or put paper on it before they sit. That's why toilet seats are really clean in public restrooms. I mean, one of the cleanest areas in a public restroom is a toilet seat because people keep wiping it all the time.
Well, the guys sit down, the women don't. But
is this degenerating?
I suppose. I guess the
bottom
bottom
line
line
is start talking about footprints on toilet seats, but I'll leave that for the next.
Well, I guess the bottom line is that I think this is, as Barbara and Nancy pointed out, is that the intersection of the various different things that we talked about today, and perhaps especially the perspective that Saad and Simon bring to this, is the reality and the real world side of why decisions are made and how how decisions are made in the context of conducting a day-to-day business. And I think it's really important for us to look at the practical realities of dealing with disease and what that really means. So with that in mind, I'd like to continue this forum. We cannot wait until next April to have intersections. So you're all welcome to join in the Thursday meeting. And Barbara and Nancy, you're welcome to use my Thursday meeting at your liberty. It's your opportunity to sustain this and keep it going. I do encourage everybody to join in if you can. Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you to wrap up.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So given that the folks the folks who are left have been here all day, I'm going to spare sort of the blow-by-blow wrap-up, and I'll just Steve mentioned air, and so I'll mention a little bit about that. But I will remind us we have spent the last 3 or so hours together, and just remind us, sort of walk us through a little bit on that. And so with that. My name is Jim Beiser. I'm a professor of climate adaptation and international development here at the University of Arizona in the School of Natural Resources and the Environment. I'm also the founding director of the Arizona Institutes for Resilience, or as Steve calls it, AIR. As a little aside, my ex-friend David then took advantage of that and called me the airhead. So the no, he's not my ex-friend. He's a good guy. AIR is a constellation of 11 units that are focused on marshaling all of the resources of the university to tackle the interrelated issues that are challenges to our ability to survive and thrive into the future. And that is, we're dedicated to creating science-based social, economic, technological, and policy solutions that are aimed at creating a society that's resilient to shocks brought upon us by human insults to our natural system on which we rely for life itself. We in AIR, we're solutions focused, and we recognize that universities can be innovative, and we have the luxury to fill knowledge gaps through our research. And of course, we also are in the business of teaching that is equipping our future leaders, doers, thinkers with the skills to address these complex issues. We also recognize that we have limits, and the least not being that we cannot by ourselves take solutions to scale. That is where purposeful partnerships with industry and government come in. I've committed my institute to working side by side with Restruct, the Restruct program led by Barbara Bryson, who is our convener of this symposium, so that the AIR program, the one that I oversee, that would have been focused on the built environment, is in fact Restruct. So Barbara and I, within anyone that works in universities, knows that it isn't necessarily natural to work together. But I found that working with Barbara is absolutely natural. So AIR and Restruct will be side by side. And just to remind you about Restruct, it has four main thrusts to redress inequality and injustice in the re-envisioning of the built environment, to create resilient and efficient urban and rural systems, to design for optimal health, to enable innovation through better decision-making and data analysis. And as you might guess, I'm also a huge fan of Steve Winston's transcending incrementalism approach. I participated in 2 of Steve's in-person workshops, one in Long Island, New York, one in Swansea, Wales, and then all 18 of Steve's Thursday weekly Zoom events. In between, he and I conspire quite a bit to move universities faster toward solutions without sacrificing the value and efficacy of our work. So now, what I was really supposed to do was to reflect on the day, and I'll just remind you how we spent the last 3 hours. President Robbins opened the day with a few minutes. That was important to us because it is important that we have our university senior leadership being supportive of what we work on. And it is clear to all of us who work here that resilience is a top priority for the University of Arizona. Our panelists, some of whom I think have had to leave, but nevertheless, I think Dr. Alethea Ida had to go and get ready for teaching unless she's still here. I can't see the people. And she laid out a research framework for physical environments and human activities in hotel re-entry. Dr. Chuck Gerba, I see Chuck still here. And we had a lot of fun hearing from him about germs and germ exposure, particularly in aircraft, identifying viruses on surfaces. I think I'm real happy that I know the things that you taught us today, Chuck, because knowing is better than not knowing, especially in your business. Dr. Brian Fleck, who did have to leave, he talked about communicating to the public, how important it is, and referred to it as being more like the broken telephone game, where scientists gather evidence, we speak translated scientese, the listener then further translates, and the policymaker acts, and often using the information in ways very differently than what was intended by the scientists. I think Steve pointed out that we need to improve the signal to noise level, and that is certainly true. Dr. Milana Bookman-Trouds talked to us about her focus on engineering controls for interrupting the spread of infectious organisms, about the practical things we can do to make our spaces much more virus-free. And she focused on the engineering controls because they don't depend on human behavior. It reminds me of when I was finishing up in physics at the University of Washington, thinking that I wanted to go into an economics and policy a graduate program, and my physics professor, one of my main physics professors, asked me, well, Jim, you could be a really good physicist. Why would you be going into the soft sciences? And my answer was, I decided to do the things that were really, really hard, and the hardest things are the ones that you include humans in. We had a great discussion. In fact, most of the discussion was around Saad Aude's getting people back into hotels, his protocols for hospitality industry, the Crown Standard audit, and a lot of questions about that, including how do you really know if someone's actually cleaned and sat and played solitaire. So combining Assad and his group's needs with the DOTS technology to be able to actually determine what has and has not been done and what is clean and what is not. With the goal of providing standards to give people confidence to be able to return into the spaces and into the activities that are so important to us. So hugely interesting discussion. I'll just finally just say, I want to thank President Robbins. He's not here, but he said that he was going to watch the video. So I do want him to hear us thanking him for giving us a few minutes of the morning. I, for one, am aware of exactly how crazy busy his days are. I want to thank each one of the panelists that I just mentioned. Thank you, Steve Winston. You're our choreographer and prompter of unexpected conversations. Barbara Bryson and Dean Nancy Pollard-Elwand here at the University of Washington. Also, there's someone that's probably listening, but no one knows because he's in the background, Alex Gans. He's behind the scenes making the technology work. He's done a really nice job, and certainly all the participants. Tomorrow, third and final day of this first symposium, is going to be focused on COVID-related urban and real estate transformations. And so with that, I want to thank everyone yet again, and see you tomorrow at 8:30.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Richard, I'm hoping you'll join us tomorrow too.
Oh, you bet. My colleague Bill Fulton is one of the speakers, I believe.
Okay. Hey, Saad, thanks for joining. Thanks, Chuck.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah,
All right.
thanks everyone.
Be well.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thank
Steve.
you very much. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Too licky,